Today, we are taking a really necessary journey.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go beyond just the diagnostic definitions, the checklists.
Right.
We're going right into the wiring, the human operating system itself. We're moving past what these disorders look like from the outside.
Yes. Beyond the labels.
Exactly.
Wow.
We're asking the really crucial question. What does it actually feel like to live with these internal systems when they are actively working against you?
And that is the essential mission for us today. Our goal is to really break down some complex material. This stuff comes from, rigorous clinical guides, but also these deep, deep explorations of the internal subjective landscape.
Experience.
The experience. We want to arm you, the learner, with a clear, thorough understanding of this, to give you that immediate, visceral aha moment about the constant, invisible internal battles people are facing every single day.
And we've gathered some really rich source material that covers a massive scope. I mean, we're going from fundamental failures in mood regulation all the way to identity fragmentation.
Yeah.
And these profound alterations in how someone even perceives reality.
It's a huge spectrum.
It is. And our sources have shown us that these are complex neurological and physiological realities. So our mission here is to be expert guides through all this material to make these incredibly complex and often misunderstood internal experiences accessible.
Giving you actionable, nuanced knowledge and quickly.
Right. We're essentially looking at the brain as this highly complex machine, and we're diagnosing the core disconnects that can, hijack its normal adaptive function.
Exactly. And when we talk about this wide spectrum of conditions, the underlying principle is always, always the same. These are not moral failings. They are not character failings. They are sophisticated, complex struggles involving neurochemistry, genetics, the impact of trauma on brain structure, and just fundamental differences in how a brain might process reality or focus or emotion. We're going deep on the experience of that disconnect.
Okay, so let's unpack this with one of the most common, yet I think still deeply misunderstood conditions. Major Depressive Disorder, MDD.
Mm-hmm.
When someone says they're sad, the natural reaction is empathy, but MDD is, it's just fundamentally different. It's a biological issue, a chemical reality that completely shifts the internal landscape.
It is. It is fundamentally neurochemical. See, depression affects how the brain produces and utilizes these crucial chemicals we call neurotransmitters.
Right, the messengers.
The messengers, exactly. We're talking specifically about things like serotonin, which manages mood and sleep, and dopamine, which is essential for, pleasure, motivation, reward-seeking behavior.
So when those systems malfunction, it's not just that you're sad.
No, it's not. The disorder doesn't just make you sad. It literally drains the color, the taste, and the motivation out of life itself.
And this is where it gets really interesting, distinguishing between that internal experience of sadness versus the internal experience of MDD.
Yeah.
Our sources clearly lay this out. Sadness, even profound grief. It has a reason. It has a story, a cause you can trace. Loss, a job failure, a relationship ending. It's tied to an event.
But major depressive disorder, it just exists as this heavy, constant, pervasive emptiness that just settled in, often without any external trigger at all.
Even when on the outside, your life looks fine.
Right. Even when, from an objective standpoint, your life looks comfortable or even successful. The feeling isn't just sadness, it's an emotional absence.
That absence.
You lose the capacity to feel pleasure, there's the clinical term for it, and hedonia, things that once brought you joy. A favorite song, a hobby, time with loved ones. They now feel entirely pointless or flat or just inaccessible.
So the brain is physically struggling to create that reward chemical.
It's struggling to generate the chemical reward required to even experience a positive emotion.
And that has to lead right into the physical struggle. I mean, this is not just emotional fatigue that, a good nap can fix. This is systemic.
It is. It's the ultimate energy deficit. Imagine waking up exhausted, feeling like your limbs are made of lead, even after sleeping for 10 or 12 hours.
Why? What's happening there?
Well, it's because those chemical regulatory systems that provide energy, focus, and restful sleep systems involving norepinephrine and serotonin, they're just not properly resetting overnight. So getting out of bed isn't just a choice.
It's like climbing a mountain.
It can literally feel like trying to climb a sheer cliff face.
Yeah.
Your body feels heavy, your muscles ache, and just moving requires this monumental effort.
And what about cognitive function? Because it seems like that physical slowing is mirrored by a kind of mental slowing, too.
Absolutely. We call it psychomotor retardation. Thinking becomes sluggish. Decisions, even minor ones like what to eat or what to wear, become completely overwhelming.
Why is that?
Because the brain just lacks the necessary chemical speed to process options efficiently. And this is why people withdraw. It's not malice, it's not indifference. It's because the energy required just to perform a normal social interaction, to smile, to listen, to speak coherently, is energy they simply do not possess.
Every little task is like a tax on a system that's already bankrupt.
A monumental tax on a depleted reserve.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
And in terms of the internal narrative, the story it tells you, MDD seems like a master of quiet subversion. It doesn't scream at you, it whispers.
That internal whisper is incredibly insidious. It convinces the person that this numbness, this lack of energy, that this is who they really are now.
Oh, wow.
That they've been fundamentally exposed as a fraud or a failure. It tells you that joy was temporary, that hope is a lie invented by happy people.
So it reinforces itself.
The disorder tightens its grip by using this cognitive distortion to convince you that nothing will ever get better, making recovery feel, impossible. It's a profound, chemically driven shift in your self-worth and your perception of the future.
So if someone is navigating this chemical battle, what's the pathway forward?
Well, the pathway involves recognizing that this is treatable. The treatment is often a dual approach. You have talk therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, which helps challenge those corrosive, hopelessness-driven thoughts.
Right, changing the narrative.
And at the same time, you have medications, particularly SSRIs and similar antidepressants. They work to modulate how the brain uses its remaining neurotransmitters, and often that's what makes the talk therapy possible. It lifts that heavy, crushing physical weight just enough for you to engage. It's all about managing the condition to regain the capacity to feel motivated and alive again.
Okay, now let's pivot sharply from the heavy drag of depression to the relentless, exhausting speed of anxiety. If MDD is the color draining out of life, then Generalized Anxiety Disorder, or GAD, is turning normal worry into a constant, nonstop alarm system that just refuses to shut off.
That is the perfect thematic contrast. The core issue in GAD is a neurological overresponse. The brain's danger assessment circuits. They treat everyday, non-threatening situations.
Like what?
A late text message, a minor work deadline, a vague ache in your knee. It treats those as if they were emergencies. It floods the body with stress hormones, adrenaline, and cortisol in a state of constant readiness.
So your internal state is just one of perpetual low-grade fear, right? I mean, worry is productive when it helps you solve a problem, but GAD worry, it seems entirely unproductive.
It's toxic worry. While everyone worries about money or relationships from time to time, GAD compels you to worry about everything, all the time. It often focuses on these elaborate, low-probability disasters that haven't happened and likely never will.
So it's the anticipation.
The anticipatory anxiety is the worst part. The worry cycle means lying awake at night, meticulously imagining disasters, replaying every minor social interaction from the day, convinced you said or did something catastrophically wrong. It just steals your ability to relax or be truly present.
And the sources really emphasize the physical cost of this.
Yeah.
Because the nervous system is running this marathon, the body physically pays the price.
It absolutely does. The body remains chronically tense. The sympathetic nervous system is always primed for fight or flight.
So you see physical symptoms.
You see constant physical manifestations. Aching shoulders and neck, tension headaches, persistent stomach problems because the stress hormones disrupt digestion, and chronic fatigue from poor sleep. You're exhausted because your body is maintaining a state of high alert, waiting for a danger that never materializes.
The brain has lost the ability to tell the difference.
It has lost the ability to differentiate between a genuinely dangerous threat and merely a difficult thought.
And now, let's look at panic disorder. Because if GAD is that constant low hum of fear,
Right.
Panic disorders are the catastrophic spike. It's the false alarm that feels terrifyingly real.
That's it. Panic disorder is the brain's fear center, the amygdala, just misfiring completely. It triggers a full, immediate, overwhelming survival response without any external threat. It is a sudden, intense bout of fear that is physically and cognitively debilitating.
So walk us through the internal experience of that peak panic attack. What does that feel like?
Okay, so it hits without warning and it peaks extremely rapidly, usually within 10 minutes. The physical symptoms are immediate. Your heart pounds so hard that you are certain in that moment that you are having a heart attack and you are about to die.
Wow.
There's often hyperventilation, which causes your chest to tighten and creates this terrifying feeling of being unable to catch your breath. Along with this, you have dizziness, a feeling of being detached from reality. We call that derealization, profuse sweating, numbness or tingling.
And your mind is just racing.
Your mind interprets every single one of those physical sensations as absolute imminent catastrophe. It's a vicious feedback loop of physical symptoms feeding cognitive terror.
And the secondary trap is maybe the most life-limiting part of it all. The profound fear of having another one.
That's the real tragedy of panic disorder. Once you've experienced that primal level of terror, your world immediately begins to shrink. The person starts to avoid places where previous attacks happened or places where escape would be difficult.
Like grocery stores or highways.
Crowded grocery stores, long bridges, highways, public transit, sometimes even just leaving the house at all. And this avoidance, which is a rational attempt to avoid that internal terror, is what leads to agoraphobia and severely limits the person's life.
So you become afraid of your own body.
You become afraid not of the world, but of the unpredictable betrayal of your own nervous system. It fundamentally steals your sense of safety in your own skin.
So we've established that depression pulls the system into this debilitating low, and anxiety locks it into a hyper-alert state. Now we move into conditions that are characterized by extreme, often volatile, regulatory failures. Our next stop is bipolar disorder, which is a brain chemistry problem defined by these dramatic, uncontrollable swings.
That's a good thematic bridge. If GAD keeps the pedal pressed down at all times, bipolar disorder is where the accelerator and the brake fail in dramatic, alternating shifts.
An emotional pendulum.
Exactly, swinging wildly between two distinct and exhausting poles. Moo mania, or the less intense version, hypomania, and then profound depression.
And it's so crucial to emphasize that these are not just mood swings in the way we casually talk about them.
Oh, not at all.
This is an entirely different chemical phenomenon.
Absolutely. These cycles are sustained, they last for days or weeks or even months, and the contrast between the two states is neurologically immense. The brain is effectively operating at two vastly different speeds, and the individual has very little control over when that switch happens.
So let's unpack the manic phase first. Our sources describe the internal experience as feeling, and I'm quoting here, superhuman. What is happening inside the brain to generate that kind of intense, relentless energy?
During a manic episode, the brain is flooded with a hyperabundance of activating neurotransmitters. So the internal experience is one of overwhelming energy, euphoria, and intense confidence.
So you feel like you can do anything.
Anything. The person might need only 2 hours of sleep, yet wake up buzzing with ideas. Thoughts race incredibly fast, sometimes so fast they struggle to even articulate them, and speech becomes pressured, rapid, and impossible to interrupt. The world seems brighter, connections feel profound. The individual genuinely believes they possess unlimited potential or wisdom.
But that energy, it quickly tips into danger. The impulsivity and recklessness that characterize the functional failures of mania.
This is where the damage happens. Because their judgment is impaired by this high-speed euphoric state, risky decisions suddenly seem brilliant or necessary. We see reckless spending draining bank accounts overnight, or starting multiple massive projects that are impossible to finish.
Or engaging in high-risk behaviors.
Right, without thinking of the consequences. The energy often burns so hot that irritability spikes aggressively when other people can't keep up or try to intervene. And in severe mania, this intense, high-speed state can tip into psychosis.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning it manifests as paranoia, grandiosity, or elaborate delusions, completely blurring the line with reality.
And then, of course, the inevitable crash, the depressive pull that follows that high.
The crash it's physically and emotionally devastating. All that artificially generated superhuman energy just drains away completely. The individual enters a major depressive episode, often characterized by severe lethargy and hopelessness.
And what makes this low so much heavier, I imagine, is the memory of the high.
That's exactly it. They know what it feels like to feel brilliant and limitless, which makes the subsequent inability to get out of bed or shower or function feel like an utterly profound, crushing failure.
The cost of this unpredictability is immense. It must create chaos across every part of life.
It's exhausting for everyone involved. Relationships suffer because loved ones struggle to keep up with the emotional and behavioral volatility.
And plans made in mania.
Plans initiated during mania, the new business, the move across the country, they often fall apart entirely during the depressive state. And that leaves real-world consequences like debt or ruined credit that haunt the person later. This constant swing in brain chemistry requires dedicated, specialized treatment.
And what are the key management tools for such a volatile system?
Mood stabilizers are the absolute cornerstone of management. They work to flatten that chemical pendulum to prevent the swings from reaching those dangerous extremes,
And therapy.
of course. This is combined with psychotherapy, which helps the person develop skills to monitor their mood state, identify early warning signs of an approaching shift, and navigate the consequences of past manic decisions.
Okay, so if bipolar disorder involves extremes of emotion and energy, schizophrenia involves extremes of perception. It fundamentally fractures how the brain processes, organizes, and experiences reality.
Right, here we're looking at a disorder rooted in severe dysregulation of neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine, which affects the brain's filtering and organizational systems. The result is a profound malfunction in how reality is integrated, leading the mind to construct experiences that are entirely internal.
Let's start with what are called the positive symptoms, which are things that are added to reality that shouldn't be there. Hallucinations, for instance. These are sensory experiences that are very real to the person.
They're intensely real. The most common form is auditory hallucination, hearing voices. These voices are often external and aggressive. They might criticize the person constantly or comment mockingly on their actions.
Or worse.
Or, most terrifyingly, issue commands. The voices might be telling them to harm themselves or avoid food or trust no one. And to be clear, this is not imagination. The neural pathways for hearing are firing as if someone is actually speaking.
And then we have delusions, those fixed, false beliefs that feel absolutely true, regardless of any counter-evidence.
Delusions are core to the disorder. These are often persecutory. The absolute belief that the government is tracking them, or strangers are plotting against them, or their families being watched.
It can also be grandiose, right?
It can, where the person believes they are a messiah or a secret agent or possess unique and often dangerous powers. But crucially, the brain generates these beliefs with the same level of certainty that you or I would have that the sun rose this morning. This is the root of the internal terror.
On the other side of the coin, we have the negative symptoms, which subtract what should be there. And these are often harder for outsiders to understand.
They are less dramatic, but they are equally debilitating. This involves a fundamental flattening of emotions, an inability to feel or express joy, sorrow, or excitement naturally.
And a loss of motivation.
A profound loss of motivation, known as avolition. This isn't laziness. It's a neural disconnect that makes generating the internal impulse to act, to shower, to eat, to move from the couch, feel utterly impossible. The world seems mute, and the self feels inert.
And the disorganization of thought and speech also falls under this umbrella.
Yes. Disorganized speech can manifest as what's called word salad, a complete lack of logical connection between sentences. Or, conversely, the person might stop talking altogether mid-sentence because forming a coherent, linear thought just requires too much cognitive energy.
So the internal world is just chaotic.
The internal world is confusing, loud, and disorganized, which makes external communication frustrating and sometimes impossible.
So the internal experience then must be a state of intense, constant confusion and isolation and fear. I mean, not being able to trust your own perceptions or even your own voice.
That is the daily reality. Imagine having a constant, critical audience inside your head, while at the same time being unable to sort the incoming information from the outside world. It's a constant state of siege. The individual is left confused, isolated, and profoundly scared.
And before we move on, we have to forcefully address the deeply harmful stigma that surrounds this disorder.
We have to. The depiction of people with schizophrenia as violent threats is morally wrong and factually incorrect.
The opposite is true.
The opposite is true. People living with schizophrenia are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. The primary danger they face is internal and directed toward themselves, often related to the terrifying commands of hallucinations. Treatment, which is primarily antipsychotic medications, is crucial for helping to manage those symptoms and allow the person to achieve stability and a higher level of functioning.
Okay, moving now to a condition rooted in anxiety and control. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. This is characterized by a relentless, debilitating internal loop.
It is. It's a mind trapped by repetition and the desperate need to perform rituals that offer only momentary relief.
And how does that loop start?
The OCD loop begins when the brain gets fixated on a specific fear or unwanted image. That's the obsession. And it just refuses to let go. This thought is intrusive, it's urgent, and it creates this massive, unbearable distress that the person immediately feels compelled to neutralize.
And these obsessions are rarely just, benign worries. They feel catastrophic and often violate the person's own moral code.
Exactly. They might be an intense fear of contamination or disease, leading to a terror of touching doorknobs. Or, and this is profoundly distressing, they might involve urgent, unwanted, violent, or sexual images directed at loved ones, which the person finds horrifying but cannot dismiss.
And the brain makes it feel real.
The brain generates the thought with such intensity that it demands immediate action to ensure the disaster it suggests does not happen.
And that immediate action is the compulsion, the ritual. The person knows, logically, that it's not working, but they can't stop.
The compulsion is the behavior performed in response to the obsession, and it's intended to reduce the anxiety. The person might wash their hands until they crack and bleed, check the oven 15 times before leaving the house, count objects, tap, or mentally repeat phrases until it feels right.
And the disorder tells them this is necessary.
The disorder convinces them that performing this specific, often elaborate action is the only thing preventing the catastrophe.
It sounds like being imprisoned by your own brain's irrational demands.
That is precisely the internal prison. The intellectual part of the person knows, logically, that checking the light switch 10 times makes no sense, or that the violent thought they had doesn't make them a bad person. But the fear is so overwhelmingly intense, the neural alarm bells are ringing so loudly that they cannot override the compulsion.
And the result is?
The result is a massive loss of time, exhaustion, physical pain from the rituals, and a sense of profound shame over behaviors they cannot control.
So how do you break a loop that's reinforced by the temporary relief it provides?
The most effective psychological treatment is called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. It's a specific form of CBT.
And sounds hard.
It's counterintuitive and incredibly difficult. It forces the person to confront the obsessive trigger, that's the exposure, and then intentionally prevent themselves from performing the neutralizing ritual, the response prevention. This teaches the brain to tolerate the anxiety spike, allowing the fear signal to eventually decrease naturally, which proves that the ritual wasn't necessary to prevent the feared outcome.
It's hard work.
It's very hard work, but it's the key to regaining control over one's own time and mind.
So we've explored conditions born from chemical highs, lows, and these rigid loops. Now let's shift to the impact of fundamental developmental differences and the long shadow of trauma on the mind's internal architecture. Our next deep dive is into a regulation deficit that affects millions.
ADHD is one of the most thoroughly misunderstood disorders. It's often simplified to losing things or not trying hard enough, but internally, it is a pervasive regulation deficit rooted in the brain's executive functions.
And where does that deficit originate neurologically?
It's fundamentally rooted in the structure and function of the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain. It's responsible for planning, working memory, emotional control, and the ability to shift focus. In ADHD, this region develops slower or functions with a significant difference.
And it involves dopamine.
Critically, yes. It involves a deficit in the brain's utilization of dopamine.
Okay, let's explain that dopamine connection because that is the most crucial nugget of knowledge here. The common misconception is that someone with ADHD can't focus on anything.
Right.
But the sources show it's an inability to choose what gets attention, and that links back to the reward system.
That's the key distinction. Dopamine is the brain's currency for motivation and future reward. When the brain doesn't release enough dopamine in response to a task, that task has zero intrinsic chemical reward.
But the brain needs a bigger push.
The brain of a person with ADHD requires high levels of stimulation, novelty, interest, or urgency, like an imminent deadline, to generate enough dopamine to initiate action.
So if a task is boring, like doing taxes or folding laundry, the brain treats it like it doesn't exist, even if the person desperately wants to do it.
Precisely. That's the gap between intention and execution that willpower alone cannot bridge. They can achieve intense hyperfocus on stimulating topics, video games, specialized projects, intense research. But applying that focus to mandatory, boring tasks feels like a physical, painful effort because the brain refuses to provide the necessary motivation currency.
Which explains why things get lost, deadlines are missed.
And follow-through fails. Exactly.
And the symptoms manifest as both inattention and hyperactivity or impulsivity. What does that look like in daily life?
The inattention is a constant battle against poor working memory and something called time blindness.
Time blindness.
Yeah, time doesn't feel like a constant flow. It only exists as now and not now, which leads to massive procrastination followed by panicked urgency. You're losing keys, you're late consistently, forgetting essential steps and tasks.
And the hyperactivity.
The hyperactivity, especially in adults, is often internalized. It's a chronic restlessness, fidgeting, foot tapping, or just an internal motor that never shuts off. And the impulsivity involves instant regret, interrupting people, reckless buying decisions, or suddenly quitting a job simply because the effort of staying became too difficult.
And the most exhausting part of it all must be that internal conflict. You know you have the intelligence and capacity, yet you're watching yourself fail repeatedly because of this neural deficit.
That's the defining shame spiral. The person with ADHD is often labeled careless, unmotivated, or lazy throughout their life. But internally, they're trying harder than anyone realizes just to achieve the baseline functioning that neurotypical people manage automatically. They live with the frustrating, exhausting knowledge that they are consistently self-sabotaging, even though they desperately crave structure and successful outcomes.
Continuing our exploration of developmental differences, autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a complex condition affecting how the brain perceives and interacts with the world, especially concerning social dynamics and sensory processing.
ASD is truly a difference in operating system, not a deficit in potential. It affects social interaction, communication, and is characterized by restrictive or repetitive behaviors. But the spectrum is immense, meaning the internal experience of one individual with ASD can be profoundly different from the next.
For our well-informed learner, let's move beyond the basic definitions and discuss the internal experience, particularly around social interaction and sensory processing.
Okay. The core challenge often revolves around navigating the complex, highly nuanced world of neurotypical social cues.
Like what?
Eye contact, subtle shifts in tone, non-literal language, body language. These cues that neurotypical people absorb intuitively often require intense conscious analysis for someone with ASD. This leads to the phenomenon of masking.
Masking the incredible effort required to appear neurotypical.
It's exhausting. Imagine constantly running a complex social script in your head just to participate in a conversation, analyzing every word and gesture rather than interacting naturally. This continuous performance drains cognitive resources, leading to severe burnout and social exhaustion.
Which is why intense interests and repetitive behaviors, what's called stimming, are so important.
They're vital.
Why are those specific behaviors so crucial for regulation?
Repetitive behaviors like hand flapping or rocking or engaging deeply in specific interests serve as crucial self-regulatory tools. They provide predictable, reliable sensory input or mental absorption in a world that often feels overwhelmingly chaotic and unpredictable.
And that chaos is often rooted in sensory processing differences. This is a major internal experience we need to emphasize.
Yes. The nervous system can process sensory information, sound, light, texture, smell at a radically different intensity. A normal fluorescent light might feel blinding. A low hum might feel like an unbearable drill.
So you get sensory overload.
You get sensory overload where the brain is simply flooded with too much input to function. This often leads to meltdowns, which are physiological shutdowns, not tantrums. The world is experienced with the volume turned up way too high, constantly.
This brings us to the concept of the double empathy problem, which sort of shifts the focus of understanding.
It does. This concept suggests that communication challenges are a mutual issue, not solely residing in the person with ASD. Neurotypical people struggle to understand the communication style and worldview of those with ASD, just as those with ASD struggle to understand the neurotypical world.
It's a two-way street.
It stresses that different cognitive styles require different methods of connection, rather than demanding only one group adapt entirely.
The intervention focus, therefore, must be on facilitating that connection and leveraging unique strengths.
Absolutely. Early intervention, including speech, occupational, and behavioral therapies, is about providing tools to navigate the world and promoting environments where their unique strengths like deep pattern recognition, intense focus, and integrity can flourish. It's about building a bridge, not fixing a perceived brokenness.
We transition now to the immediate impact of overwhelming experience. PTSD is a condition where the brain is fundamentally and physically rewired by experiencing or witnessing severe trauma. It gets stuck in perpetual survival mode.
That's it. Normally, when a threat passes, the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, works with the amygdala, the feel center, to file that event away as a past memory. With PTSD, that system breaks down.
The memory doesn't get filed away.
It remains active, present, and potent, convinced the danger is still imminent.
And the distinction between a normal memory and a flashback is so key here, because a flashback is an experience, not just a recollection.
That's right. Flashbacks are vivid physical re-experiences. A seemingly innocuous trigger, a smell, a specific tone of voice, a random sound like a car backfire, can instantly bypass the rational processing center and transport the person back to the traumatic moment.
And their body reacts as if it's real.
Their heart pounds, their breathing constricts, and their body genuinely believes they are in immediate danger right now. It is a full bodily and sensory hijacking, not simply remembering a bad day.
So the internal state becomes one of constant, exhausting vigilance?
Hypervigilance is the neurological hallmark. The person's brain is constantly scanning the environment for threats. They might constantly position themselves near an exit, jump violently at sudden noises, or struggle to sleep because the nervous system won't relax. This constant state of alert is physically and mentally draining. It prevents the brain from ever entering a true state of rest.
And this leads to avoidance, the desperate attempt to manage the triggers.
Avoidance is a rational response to an irrational threat system. The person avoids anything that reminds them of the trauma-specific routes, types of people, entire categories of activities.
And their world shrinks.
This coping mechanism leads to a massive shrinking of their life, cutting them off from relationships and opportunities. They also struggle with emotional regulation, often experiencing bursts of disproportionate anger or, conversely, profound emotional numbness and disconnection, which is known as dissociation, as a way to mentally escape the overwhelming present.
The person feels broken because their own alarm system just will not turn off.
Exactly. They are constantly fighting a war that, externally, is over. The chronic activation of the stress axis, flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, physically deteriorates their well-being. Treatment, like trauma-focused therapies such as EMDR or cognitive processing therapy, is focused on safely processing those memories, allowing the brain to finally file them away as past events and thus turning the survival alarm off.
Moving to another condition profoundly affected by dysregulation and often linked to trauma is borderline personality disorder, or BPD. It's defined by relentless emotional instability.
Yeah.
This is the definition of living in a constant internal emotional emergency mode.
It really is. The primary struggle in BPD is emotional dysregulation. For most people, emotions hit like waves that rise and fall. For someone with BPD, the same stimuli cause feelings to hit like tsunamis. The emotions spike faster, they hit at maximum intensity, and crucially, they take much, much longer to return to a baseline state.
That speed and intensity must make the internal world feel absolutely chaotic.
It creates a state of perpetual crisis. Something minor, a perceived slight, a delayed text, a plan that has to change, can trigger instant, maximum intensity rage or despair or profound fear of abandonment. There is very little middle ground. And these intense emotional states often lead to impulsive actions that are regretted immediately once the emotional intensity has subsided.
In this volatility, it creates profound chaos in relationships, fueled by an intense existential fear of abandonment.
This is the hallmark relational pattern. They desperately crave stable, secure attachment, but the intense fear of being left causes them to act in ways that inadvertently push people away.
The classic cling-push-away cycle.
Exactly. And this is reinforced by splitting, or black and white thinking, where people are seen as either perfect, idealized saviors or terrible, worthless enemies. This splitting is a protective mechanism that reduces complexity, but it is devastating to relationships.
The identity instability also seems central to the internal chaos.
Absolutely. The sense of self is fragile and often shifts constantly. They may mirror the interest, style, or personality of whoever they are currently close to, precisely because they lack a solid, stable internal sense of who they are underneath the emotional storm. They struggle with core questions like, what do I believe? What do I want? Who am I really?
And what about the impulsive behaviors and self-harm that our sources detail?
Impulsivity is a core feature, often driven by the need to release the overwhelming abstract pressure of the emotional intensity. This can manifest as reckless behavior, sudden quitting of jobs, binge eating, dangerous driving, or verbal lashing out.
And self-harm.
Tragically, self-harm is sometimes used not as a suicidal gesture, but as a severe regulatory tool, a way to turn abstract, crushing internal pain into concrete, localized physical pain. It effectively grounds them or releases the emotional pressure cooker.
We have to reiterate that this is not intentional manipulation of others.
Never. The person is genuinely living in a constant emotional emergency. They desperately crave stability and validation, but their own emotional system is fundamentally running in crisis mode. The key treatment that helps manage these crises is dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT.
And how does DBT directly address this unique struggle?
DBT is specifically tailored to BPD. It teaches 4 core skills: mindfulness, which helps them stay present; distress tolerance, which teaches them how to survive overwhelming emotional crises without resorting to impulsive behaviors; emotion regulation, which helps them modulate the intensity of feelings; and interpersonal effectiveness, which helps them build and maintain healthier relationships.
Dissociative identity disorder, historically known as multiple personality disorder, is one of the most complex conditions we'll cover. It arises directly and fundamentally from severe, repetitive childhood trauma. It's the mind's ultimate survival response fragmentation.
That's right. When a child experiences abuse or trauma so overwhelming, so severe, and so inescapable that they cannot possibly process it, the mind employs extreme compartmentalization. The brain essentially walls off the unbearable emotions, memories, and sensory experiences into separate identity states, or alters.
And that allows the child to survive.
It allows a part of the person to continue functioning and surviving the environment while other parts hold the pain.
So, to be crystal clear, these are not imaginary friends, nor are they separate people. They are distinct, walled-off parts of one person's psyche.
They are parts of a single, highly fragmented self. These identity states, which may have different apparent ages, genders, skill sets, or even physical reactions, hold specific memories, emotions, or roles.
So one alter might hold the anger.
Right, one alter might hold all the anger, another might hold the deep traumatic memory. Others are focused on specific functional roles, like going to work or interacting with the external world. The internal landscape is often one of massive conflict, where different parts vie for control or operate without awareness of the others.
And the symptoms manifest externally as switching and profound lost time.
Switching between alters can happen suddenly and without warning, often triggered by stress or reminders of the trauma. The person will find themselves in a new location, maybe having hours or days of amnesia, with no memory of how they got there or what they did.
They might find evidence.
They might find notes in different handwriting, or friends might mention conversations the host identity doesn't recall having. This loss of time is the most debilitating internal symptom. They can't trust their own memories, their actions, or their timeline.
So the painful reality is that the survival mechanism that protected the child now creates severe internal chaos in adult life.
It makes coherence impossible. Imagine trying to navigate life when you are never truly sure which part of you is present, what responsibilities that part accepted, or what memories are lurking. This is a constant state of internal confusion, which is why long-term specialized therapy is essential. The goal is not to eliminate the parts, but to facilitate communication and integration, slowly rebuilding a cohesive sense of self.
Now we turn to conditions where internal distress, whether it's rooted in trauma or neurochemistry, manifests through external, often life-threatening behaviors.
Eating disorders profoundly illustrate how deep internal distress, often co-occurring with anxiety, depression, or perfectionism, can twist the fundamental relationship with food into a mechanism for coping and control. They are rarely about food or vanity. They are about internal emotional regulation.
Let's start with anorexia nervosa. The restriction seems to provide a perverse sense of accomplishment.
It does. Anorexia involves severe restriction of food intake, driven by an intense consuming fear of gaining weight and a radical distortion of body image.
They see something that isn't there.
They see themselves as overweight even when they are critically dangerously thin. Internally, the hunger, the restriction, the low number on the scale, all these feel like signs of success, strength, and competence. Eating feels like failure, weakness, and loss of control. The disorder whispers that controlling food is the one arena where they can exercise perfect, unwavering control over a chaotic life.
And bulimia nervosa involves a complex, shame-driven cycle.
Bulimia is characterized by cycles of binge eating, consuming large, overwhelming amounts of food in secret, feeling utterly out of control during the binge, followed immediately by intense compensatory behaviors or purging.
Like self-induced vomiting or excessive exercise.
Exactly. And the overwhelming shame and guilt associated with the binge immediately perpetuate the desperate need to purge, trapping the individual in a devastating cycle. We also have binge eating disorder, which involves the cycles of excessive eating without the subsequent compensatory purging behavior, often leading to deep distress and shame.
The underlying message seems to be about equating external perfection with internal worth.
Absolutely. The disorder tells the person that their value is intrinsically tied to their body size, their weight, or their ability to maintain rigid control. Letting go of the restriction or the cycle means confronting the deep underlying emotional pain or anxiety that the disorder was created to manage.
And the physical damage is immense.
It's vast electrolyte imbalances, cardiac stress, tooth decay, all hidden beneath this powerful internal mental trap demanding perfection.
Given the danger, multidisciplinary treatment is essential here.
It requires immediate intervention involving a team. Therapy to address the underlying perfectionism, anxiety, and trauma, specialized nutritional counseling to restore healthy eating patterns, and sometimes medication to manage co-occurring depression or anxiety. The first step is always breaking the secrecy and shame that feeds the cycle.
We looked at general anxiety, but social anxiety disorder, or SAD, focuses specifically on the fear of performance and judgment in social situations. It turns everyday interactions into terrifying high-stakes events.
The brain of someone with SAD treats normal social situations, giving an opinion in a meeting, ordering a coffee, attending a party, as if they were literal threats to survival. This triggers the full physiological fear response, even when the rational mind knows there is no danger.
So walking into a room feels like stepping onto a giant, brightly lit stage where everyone is watching and judging every minute detail of your existence.
That is the perfect internal metaphor. The mind immediately floods with catastrophic worst-case scenarios. I will say something profoundly stupid. I will start sweating uncontrollably, everyone will see my hands shaking, and I will be humiliated and rejected.
And that intense cognitive fear triggers the body.
It triggers the body's physical response, making the internal reality match the perceived external threat.
And that physical feedback loop is so brutal because the focus on the physical symptom just makes it worse.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because the person is so intensely focused on self-monitoring. Is my voice shaking? Am I blushing? Did I look awkward? They cannot naturally engage in the conversation.
So it makes them stumble.
This self-monitoring makes them stumble over words, look away, or go completely blank, which of course confirms their internal fear that they are failing the performance. They are performing their social death in real time.
And even after the interaction ends, the performance continues in their mind.
The postmortem is relentless. For hours or days, the brain replays every perceived mistake, every awkward pause, magnifying tiny errors into social disasters. This ruminative cycle reinforces the belief that all future interactions will lead to the same humiliating failure.
How does this differ from just introversion or shyness?
Shyness involves nervousness, but the shy person can typically push through the interaction and recover quickly. Social anxiety hijacks the entire physiological and cognitive system. The fear of humiliation is so overwhelming that avoidance becomes the only safe option.
Which leads to isolation.
Tragically, yes. Severe isolation, missed professional opportunities, and profound loneliness. They are not antisocial. They are terrified of being publicly seen and judged. Hashtag tag 4.3 substance use disorders, SUDs.
And finally, we turn to substance use disorders, defined by the compulsive use of drugs or alcohol, despite mounting severe negative consequences across all areas of life.
The key distinction here is the shift from voluntary substance use to a biological disease state. Addiction is understood today as a chronic disease that fundamentally changes brain function, particularly circuits related to reward, motivation, memory, and executive function.
So the substance literally hijacks the brain's motivation system.
It does. The substances provide a massive, immediate, and artificial surge of dopamine, far greater than any natural activity could provide. Over time, the brain downregulates its natural reward systems in response.
Which means two things.
Right. First, the individual needs more of the substance to feel the same effect. And second, the capacity to find joy or motivation in anything else, hobbies, work, food, relationships, is severely diminished.
This leads directly to physical dependence, where stopping the substance causes measurable, distressing withdrawal.
Dependence is the body's system adapting to the presence of the substance. Withdrawal symptoms, which can range from severe anxiety, tremors, and nausea to life-threatening seizures, are the body's way of protesting the sudden absence of the required chemical.
So the internal battle is both psychological and physical.
Profoundly physical. The person is caught between the need to stop to save their life and the physical need to use just to feel normal or to avoid agonizing withdrawal.
Recovery, then, has to be comprehensive and sustained to address both the physical dependence and the altered brain function.
Absolutely. Recovery requires intense, sustained effort. The pathways include behavioral therapies to change thought patterns and coping mechanisms, robust support systems, and often medication-assisted treatment, or MAT.
Which uses specific medications.
Right, to manage cravings, prevent withdrawal, and allow the brain time to heal and re-regulate its motivation and reward systems. It is a long process that addresses the root psychological issues alongside the physical reality of the disease. #outro.
We have covered an incredibly vast and intense internal landscape today, exploring the sheer weight of depression, the fragmentation of identity, and the relentless speed of anxiety. If there is one synthesis we must leave the listener with, it is this. These disorders are not simple choices, they're not weaknesses or moral failings.
They are profound, complex struggles involving specific neurochemistry dopamine deficits, amygdala misfires, serotonin dysregulation, and the indelible impact of trauma on brain wiring. The value of this deep dive is realizing the internal logic behind the behaviors you might observe. We need to move beyond simple judgment.
Exactly. Seeing the struggle, not just the symptom. You now know the extraordinary effort the person with ADHD puts in just to start a boring task, realizing their brain is denying them the necessary chemical reward. You understand that the person with BPD is desperately searching for stability, but is trapped in a constant state of emotional emergency, causing them to push away the very people they fear losing. You now understand the relentless terror of the OCD loop, which hijacks time and agency.
And that recognition, it changes everything. It elevates understanding from sympathy to true, informed empathy. We've demonstrated that for individuals living with these conditions, an extraordinary, invisible amount of effort is required simply to navigate the basic, normal demands of daily tasks.
Getting out of bed, holding a conversation, trusting your own perceptions, or resisting a debilitating compulsion.
All of it.
So, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to take with you. Consider the person whose brain is constantly running an internal marathon, fighting a nonstop anxiety alarm, struggling to generate pleasure chemicals, battling fragmented identity states, or checking the stove for the 15th time.
Yeah.
If simply maintaining a functional baseline requires that level of monumental, invisible work, what does it take? What sheer measure of internal strength and resilience is required for that person simply to keep showing up every single day?
That is the true definition of quiet endurance. We hope this deep dive provides you with the context and clarity to see that incredible effort.
We'll see you next time.